Eren Yeager. As a child, Eren hated only one thing: Titans. After watching his mother get eaten, he promised to destroy every single one of them. Everything changed when he discovered that he himself was the Attack Titan. To protect humanity, or at least what he believed was protecting humanity, he had to become the very thing he hated. At first, Eren justified it as necessary. He became a monster to fight other monsters. Eren's mindset was always driven by freedom. He believed that if someone tried to take his freedom away, he had the right to take theirs first. In the beginning, that hatred was aimed at the mindless Titans. But after reaching the basement and touching Historia's hand, his understanding of the world completely changed. He realized the real enemy was not just Titans, but people. Across the ocean were humans, some evil, some innocent. To protect the people of Paradis and secure freedom for his friends, Eren slowly became the oppressor himself. He infiltrated Marley, caused attacks that killed innocent civilians and children, and even manipulated his own friends for what he believed was their safety. Eventually, his descent reached its peak with the Rumbling. By the final arc, Eren was no longer just a soldier. He became a walking catastrophe. For years, the people inside the walls feared Titans destroying their world. Eren took that same fear and unleashed it on the entire planet. He wanted freedom above everything else, the scenery he dreamed about from Armin's book. But to reach that freedom, he chose to wipe out 80% of humanity. Kaneki. The tragedy of Kaneki is built on a cruel irony. He spent his whole life fearing monsters, only to become one himself. For most people in Tokyo, ghouls were terrifying creatures hiding among humans. To Kaneki, they represented everything he feared about the world. They looked human, acted human, but survived by eating people. As someone who loved books, peace, and quiet living, Kaneki wanted nothing to do with violence. He escaped into novels because reality felt dangerous and unpredictable. The irony of his story begins with Rize Kamishiro. Kaneki didn't just meet a ghoul, he fell for one. He saw Rize as intelligent, elegant, and someone who shared his interests. But when she revealed her true nature at the construction site, his entire world turned upside down. The person he admired suddenly became the monster trying to devour him. After the accident and the organ transplant using Rize's organs, Kaneki woke up no longer fully human. His greatest horror was not the strength or the glowing eye, it was the hunger. Human food became disgusting to him, while the scent of people started to smell like food. He felt trapped inside a body that was slowly rejecting his humanity. At first, Kaneki desperately tried to hold on to who he was. He refused to eat human flesh because he believed giving in would mean losing his soul completely. He saw himself as a human trapped in a ghoul's body, caught between two worlds that hated each other. Everything changed during his torture by Yamori, also known as Jason. That suffering shattered the weak, frightened version of Kaneki. In order to survive and protect the people he cared about, he accepted the ghoul side he once hated. By embracing the monster within him, Kaneki came to a painful realization. The world itself was not purely evil, but people, both humans and ghouls, could be cruel. And to protect what mattered to him, he had to become the very thing he feared most. Light Yagami. Before finding the Death Note, Light Yagami saw the world in simple terms: good and evil. He believed society was filled with criminals who avoided punishment because the justice system was weak, slow, or corrupt. Because of his intelligence, Light felt he understood morality better than everyone else. At first, using the Death Note was just curiosity, but after killing two people, the guilt forced him to justify his actions. Instead of seeing himself as a murderer, Light convinced himself that those deaths were necessary sacrifices for a better world. Once he fully embraced the identity of Kira, his mindset changed completely. He no longer saw himself as an ordinary human following the law. He began to see himself as the law itself. Light believed that by killing criminals publicly, he could create a world where people were too afraid to commit evil. In the beginning, he only targeted dangerous criminals, but the moment people started threatening his identity or challenging his power, his idea of justice became selfish. He began killing anyone who stood against him, even innocent people like Lindell Taylor and the FBI agents investigating him. As the story continues, Light's original goal of fixing the world slowly disappears behind his growing ego. He stops being a vigilante and turns into a dictator. Instead of fighting corruption, he becomes the very thing he hated. By the end, Light manipulates innocent people, sacrifices the safety of his own family, and takes pride in the fear he creates. His downfall comes from believing that his intelligence and power made him worthy of deciding who deserved to live or die.
Lelouch. Lelouch Britannia's hatred began with the cruel system created by the Britannian Empire. Under Charles Britannia, society was built on the idea that only the strong deserved to survive, while the weak were ignored and crushed. Lelouch despised that world and wanted to destroy it. At first, his goals were personal but understandable. He wanted revenge for his mother's death and wanted to create a peaceful world for his sister, Nunnally Britannia. By becoming Zero, Lelouch created a symbol that gave hope to oppressed people and inspired rebellion against Britannia. Even in the early stages, Lelouch often manipulated people like pieces on a chessboard. However, he justified his actions because he believed he was fighting for the weak and trying to build a better future. Everything changed after the tragedy involving Euphemia Britannia. Because of Lelouch's Gios going out of control, Euphemia accidentally ordered the massacre of Japanese civilians. That moment destroyed any chance of a peaceful rebellion and forced Lelouch deeper into darkness. From then on, Lelouch accepted the idea that anyone willing to kill must also be prepared to die. He began treating himself as a necessary sacrifice for the greater good. Instead of trying to avoid becoming a villain, he chose to embrace that role completely. In the final arc, Lelouch takes the Britannian throne and becomes emperor himself. At this point, he no longer rules through inspiration. He rules through fear and absolute control. He destroys the aristocracy, centralizes all power under himself, and uses the floating fortress Damocles with its Flea weapons to threaten the entire world. To the world, Lelouch becomes the ultimate tyrant. But this was part of his plan. By conquering nations and forcing the entire world to hate him, Lelouch created a single common enemy that united former rivals together. Then, through the Zero Requiem plan, he arranged for Suzaku Kururugi, disguised as Zero, to publicly assassinate him. Through his death, Lelouch achieved what he believed was true peace.
Askeladd. Askeladd's hatred wasn't born of abstract politics, it was deeply personal. He was born after a Viking raid on Wales, the son of a Welsh noblewoman and a Danish commander named Olaf. Growing up, Askeladd watched his mother suffer as a slave under the cruelty of the Danes. She often spoke about the legend of King Arthur, believing a hero would one day return and save Wales from its invaders. But as Askeladd got older, he realized no hero was coming. If Wales was going to survive, someone would have to protect it through intelligence, manipulation, and violence. That realization shaped the rest of his life. To fight the Vikings, Askeladd believed he first had to become one of them. He abandoned his Welsh identity and created the image of a ruthless Viking mercenary. His rise to power began when he murdered his own father, then framed his half-brother for the crime. It was a cold and calculated act that showed how far he was willing to go. Over the years, Askeladd led a feared group of Viking warriors. He raided villages, burned towns, and killed countless people across England and France. To his men, he was a brilliant and charismatic leader, but internally, Askeladd hated the Viking world and even hated himself for being part of it. This is what makes his character so tragic. He spent decades pretending to be the very thing he despised. He used Viking violence, Viking greed, and Viking ambition as tools to secretly protect Wales. In his eyes, the Viking Age was a dying world built entirely on bloodshed and cruelty. Despite his brutal actions, Askeladd's true goal was never personal power. Everything he did was ultimately for the survival of his mother's homeland and the hope of creating a better future. His story reaches its climax when King Sweyn threatens to invade Wales. At that moment, Askeladd finally drops the mask he had worn for most of his life. He kills Sweyn in front of everyone, fully knowing it will cost him his life. By sacrificing himself, Askeladd accomplishes two things. He protects Wales from immediate destruction, and he helps place Canute on the throne, someone he hopes can create a world that moves beyond endless war, raiding, and slaughter.
Obito Uchiha.
Before becoming the Masked Man, Obito Uchiha was very similar to Naruto Uzumaki. He was clumsy, emotional, and deeply cared about his friends. Obito dreamed of becoming Hokage not because he wanted power, but because he wanted acknowledgement and wanted to protect the Hidden Leaf Village. During the Third Shinobi World War, Obito appeared to sacrifice his life to save Kakashi Hatake and Rin Nohara. At that point, he represented hope, a boy who believed loyalty and self-sacrifice could overcome hatred and suffering. Everything changed after Rin's death, but it was not just the loss itself that broke Obito. Madara Uchiha carefully manipulated the situation to destroy his spirit. When Obito saw Rin die by Kakashi's hand, his entire view of reality collapsed. From that moment on, Obito believed the world was nothing but suffering and disappointment. He no longer thought true peace could exist in reality. Instead of wanting to destroy the world out of hatred, he wanted to escape it completely by creating the infinite Tsukuyomi, a dream world where nobody would feel pain anymore. To him, a fake peaceful world was better than a real world filled with endless violence. The tragedy is that while trying to end suffering and manipulation, Obito became exactly like the people who manipulated him. He controlled others, started wars, and treated people as tools to achieve his goals. In many ways, he became a reflection of Madara himself. Obito also became obsessed with proving that Naruto would eventually break the same way he did. By trying to crush Naruto's hope, Obito was really trying to justify his own fall into darkness. If Naruto gave up, then Obito could believe his own choices were unavoidable. Obito Uchiha's tragedy comes from the contradiction at the center of his life. He wanted to create a world without lies or pain, yet he spent years hiding behind masks and deceiving others. He hated a world that used children as weapons, but he ended up using countless people as sacrifices for his plan. In trying to create a world where nobody would cry again, he became one of the main reasons the world suffered in the first place.